The ship screamed through the atmosphere like a dying star. Lieutenant Commander Hyan-Woo gripped the controls with both hands as warning lights flashed red all around him. The engines were dead. The navigation system showed only static. His small reconnaissance vessel had been damaged beyond repair during what should have been a routine patrol. "Come on," he whispered through gritted teeth. The ground rushed up to meet him faster than he wanted. Rocky cliffs and strange purple vegetation filled his view. This planet was not on any of his maps. The crash came hard and fast. Metal screamed against stone. Hyan-Woo's head snapped forward as his ship carved a deep furrow across the alien landscape. When everything finally stopped moving, the silence felt deafening. Hyan-Woo sat still for a moment, checking his body for injuries. His left shoulder ached, and he could taste blood in his mouth, but nothing seemed broken. The cockpit was filled with smoke and the smell of burning circuits. He needed to get out quickly. He grabbed his emergency pack and climbed through the twisted remains of his ship's hull. The first thing that hit him was the cold. The air was thin and sharp in his lungs. Above him, a pale yellow sun hung in a sky that looked more green than blue. The landscape around him was unlike anything he had seen before. Tall crystals jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. They hummed with a low energy that made his teeth ache. Between them grew twisted trees with bark that looked like metal and leaves that seemed to glow with their own light. Hyan-Woo activated his emergency beacon and waited. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The device was dead, probably. Fried in the crash. He was alone on this world with no way to call for help. He looked back at his ship. The hole was cracked open like an egg. Fuel was leaking onto the ground, creating rainbow pools that steamed in the alien air. Whatever useful supplies he could salvage, he needed to get them now, before the whole thing became too dangerous to approach. Working quickly, Hyan-Woo pulled out his remaining food rations. Water purification tablets, medical supplies, and a small, portable shelter. His rifle had survived the crash, along with 2 power cells. Not much to survive on, but it would have to do. The sun was already moving toward the horizon, and he could feel the temperature dropping. He needed shelter soon. About 100 meters from the crash site, he found a small cave formed by overlapping crystal formations. It would protect him from the wind and hide him from anything that might be hunting in the darkness as he set up his shelter. Hyan-Woo heard something that made him freeze. A howl echoed across the strange landscape, then another, and another. The sounds were not quite like wolves from Earth, but close enough to make his skin crawl. He finished setting up his shelter and sealed himself inside. Walls, he could see shapes moving between the crystal formations. They were large, about the size of earth wolves, but they moved differently. They seemed to flow across the ground rather than run. Hyan-Woo checked his rifle and settled in to wait for morning. He'd faced dangerous situations before, but never like this. He's never alone on an alien world with no hope of rescue. The next morning brought new challenges. His water supply was limited, and the local atmosphere readings showed the air was breathable, but not ideal for human lungs. He would need to find water and food soon, or his supplies would run out within weeks. As he explored the area around his shelter, Hyan-Woo got his first clear look at the creatures that had howled the night before. They were magnificent and terrifying. At the same time, they had 6 legs instead of 4, and their fur seemed to glow with soft blue and silver light. Their eyes were large and intelligent, more like those of dolphins than wolves. The pack consisted of about 12 individuals, including what looked like youngsters. They kept their distance, but Hyan-Woo could feel them watching him. They seemed curious rather than aggressive, which was something at least. One of the young ones appeared to be injured. It limped behind the others, struggling to keep up with the pack. The adult animals would stop and wait for it, making soft sounds that might have been encouragement. But Hyan-Woo could see the little one was getting weaker. That afternoon, while gathering crystal formations that his scanner said contained trace minerals, Hyan-Woo heard a sound that made his blood run cold. He followed the sound and found the injured young alien, creature trapped between 2 fallen crystal pillars. The little one had been trying to follow its pack when the crystals had shifted, pinning its back leg. It was making soft whimpering sounds, and its glowing fur was starting to fade. Blood seeped from where the crystal had cut into its leg. Hyunwoo looked around. The pack was nowhere in sight. They had probably moved on, not knowing one of their young was in trouble. The creature would die here alone if he did nothing. He thought about his limited medical supplies. Every bandage and antiseptic was precious. He might need them for himself later. The smart thing to do was walk away and let nature take its course. But when he looked into the creature's large, frightened eyes, he could not bring himself to leave. The little one reminded him of his sister's dog back home, the way it looked at him with such trust and hope. Hyunwoo knelt beside the trapped creature. It tensed at first, but then seemed to realize he was trying to help. Using his rifle as a lever, he carefully lifted the crystal pillar just enough for the little one to pull its leg free. The injury was bad but not fatal. Hyunwoo cleaned the wound with precious antiseptic and wrapped it with one of his medical bandages. The creature held still during the treatment, as if it understood what he was doing. When he finished, the little one looked up at him with what seemed like gratitude. Its fur began to glow a little brighter, and it made a soft sound that might have been thanks. Then it limped away into the crystal forest, moving slowly but steadily. Hyunwoo watched it go, wondering if he would ever see it again. He had just used supplies he might need to save his own life. But somehow, he felt better about himself than he had since crashing on this world. As the sun set on his second day on the planet, Hyunwoo heard the howls again. But this time, they sounded different. Less wild, more musical, almost like singing. Fell asleep that night wondering what tomorrow would bring on this strange and beautiful world. Hyunwoo woke to the sound of something moving outside his shelter. It was his 5th day on the planet, and his water supply was running dangerously low. He had found a small stream 2 days ago, but the water tasted bitter and made his stomach hurt. His purification tablets were almost gone. He peered through the shelter wall and saw something that made him hold his breath. The injured young creature he had helped was back. It stood about 10 meters away, watching him with those large, intelligent eyes. Its leg was still bandaged, but it seemed to be walking better. Behind the young one, Hyunwoo could see more shapes. Moving between the crystal formations, the pack had returned. He counted at least 15 of them now, all keeping their distance but clearly interested in his presence. The young creature made a soft sound, almost like a bird call. Then it dropped something on the ground and backed away. Hyunwoo waited until the creatures moved back before stepping outside to investigate. On the ground lay 3 round fruits, each about the size of his fist. They were purple with silver spots and smelled sweet. His scanner showed they contained water, sugars, and proteins. More importantly, they were not poisonous to humans. Hyunwoo looked up at the pack. They were all watching him carefully. Young one he had helped seemed to be encouraging him to eat. He picked up one of the fruits and bit into it. The taste was amazing, like a mix of honey and clean water. It was the best thing he had tasted since crashing on this world. "Thank you," he said out loud, not knowing if they could understand him. The young creature's fur glowed brighter for a moment, and it made that soft, bird-like sound again. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Each morning, Hyunwoo would find food outside his shelter. Sometimes it was fruit, sometimes it was roots that tasted like sweet potatoes. The creatures seemed to know exactly what he could eat safely. In return, Hyunwoo began leaving small gifts for them. He shared some of his human food rations, though he could not spare much. He also helped them in other ways. When he saw them struggling to reach fruit high in the metal trees, he used his rifle to shoot the branches down for them. The creatures began to trust him more. They would come closer to his shelter, sometimes sitting just a few meters away. Hyunwoo started to learn their different personalities and appearances. The pack leader was a magnificent creature with silver-blue fur that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. He was larger than the others and moved with calm confidence. Decided to call him Daeho, after his grandfather, who had been a wise and patient man. The young one he had helped was clearly special to the pack. The others treated it with gentle care, and it seemed to be learning important skills from the adults. Hyan-Wu called it Buell because of the star-like patterns in its glowing fur. As the days passed, Hyan-Wu noticed that the creatures were struggling with their own survival. The fruit trees were dying, their metal bark turning black and crumbling. The streams were drying up, and the crystal formations were losing their glow. This planet was dying, and everything on it was dying with it. Morning, Hyan-Wu found Daeho sitting outside his shelter, making low sounds that seemed almost like speech. The pack leader was trying to communicate something important. He kept looking toward the horizon and making urgent gestures with his head. Hyan-Wu followed Daeho's gaze and saw something in the distance that made his heart race. Structures. Buildings. The ruins of what had once been a city. Daeho stood and began walking toward the ruins. He looked back at Hyan-Wu and made that sound again. The message was clear. Follow me. Hyan-Wu packed his essential supplies and followed the pack toward the ancient city. The journey took most of the day, and the creatures stayed close to him, as if protecting him from unseen dangers. The ruins were incredible. Tall spires twisted into the sky like frozen tornadoes. Buildings seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it. Everything was made from the same crystal material that covered the planet, but these formations were clearly artificial. As they explored the ruins, Hyan-Wu began to understand that this had once been home to an advanced civilization. The buildings were designed with both beauty and function in mind. Even in their ruined state, they were magnificent. The creatures seemed to know their way around the ruins. They led Hyan-Wu to specific locations, showing him things that seemed important. In one building, he found walls covered with symbols that looked like writing. In another, he discovered machines that were clearly designed for purposes he could not understand. But it was in the central building that Hyan-Wu made his most important discovery. The creatures led him to a chamber filled with images carved into the crystal walls. The images told a story. They showed the planet as it had once been, green and full of life. They showed the beings who had lived here, tall and graceful creatures, with large eyes and delicate hands. They showed the six-legged creatures that looked exactly like Daeho and his pack. The images told the story of a dying world. Something had gone wrong with the planet's systems, and the original inhabitants had tried to save it. The final images showed them working with the six-legged creatures, as if they were partners in some great effort. Hyan-Wu realized that the creatures who had been helping him were not just animals. They were the descendants of beings who had once worked alongside the planet's original civilization, us. They had intelligence and purpose, just like humans did. As the sun began to set, Daeho led Hyan-Wu to a shelter within the ruins. It was more comfortable than his crash site cave, with walls that seemed to regulate temperature and air quality. The pack settled around the building, creating a protective circle. That night, Hyan-Wu lay awake, thinking about what he had learned. This planet had once been home to a great civilization. The creatures helping him were not just animals, but the guardians of this world's history and knowledge. He thought about his own situation. His food and water were still limited, though. The creature's help had extended his survival time. His communication equipment was still broken. He had no way to call for rescue. But for the first time since crashing on this world, Hyan-Wu felt hope. He was not alone. He had found friends among the stars, beings who understood cooperation and kindness. Whatever happened next, he would face it with allies. As sleep finally came, he heard the pack singing their evening song. The sound was beautiful and sad, like a lullaby for a dying world. But within it, he heard something else. He heard determination. He heard the promise that they would not give up. No matter how dark things became, tomorrow would bring new challenges and new discoveries. But tonight, Hyan-Wu slept peacefully, surrounded by friends who had once been strangers, on a world that was slowly becoming home. 3 weeks had passed since Hyan-Wu discovered the ancient ruins. His new home in the Crystal City was comfortable, but his body was starting to fail him. The alien atmosphere was slowly poisoning his lungs, and his human food supplies were nearly gone. Each morning it became harder to get out of bed. The creatures had noticed his weakness. Deho spent more time near him, watching with concerned eyes. Buell had grown stronger and now brought him special foods that seemed to help with his breathing. The young creature had also learned to understand some of his words and gestures. On this particular morning, Hyenwu woke to find his hands shaking badly. His vision was blurry, and his chest felt tight. He tried to stand but fell back down. Too weak to support his own weight, this was bad. Very bad. Ho appeared at his side within minutes, as if the pack leader had been waiting nearby. The large creature made urgent sounds toward the other members of the pack. Soon, 6 of them surrounded Hyenwu, their bodies pressed close to his to share their warmth. Bial disappeared for a while and returned with a different kind of fruit. This one was smaller and had a strange blue color, and Hyenwu ate it. He felt a little stronger. His breathing became easier, and the shaking in his hands stopped. "Thank you," he whispered to Bugel. The young creature nuzzled against his arm, its fur glowing softly in response. Over the following days, Hyenwu's condition got worse. He could barely walk from his shelter to the nearby stream. The creatures took turns staying with him, making sure he was never alone. They brought him water in their mouths when he was too weak to make the journey himself. Deho seemed to understand that traditional food was not enough to help the human. The pack leader began leading hunting parties to find new kinds of prey. They brought back small creatures that looked like a cross between rabbits and lizards. The meat was tough but nutritious, and it helped Hyenwu maintain his strength. One night, when Hyenwu was feeling particularly weak, a violent storm struck the ruins. The wind howled through the crystal structures, and lightning flashed across the green sky. Rain poured down in sheets, and the temperature dropped dangerously low. Hyono's shelter, which had seemed so solid before, began to leak. Water seeped through cracks in the crystal walls. He tried to move to a drier spot, but his legs gave out. He collapsed on the wet floor, shivering uncontrollably. That was when the entire pack surrounded him. All 15 creatures pressed their warm bodies against his, creating a living blanket of fur and heat. They stayed with him through the entire night, never moving, never leaving him alone in the cold. When morning came, Hyenwu was still alive, but barely. He had developed a fever, and his body was fighting some kind of infection. For 3 days, he drifted in and out of consciousness while the creatures cared for him. During his fevered dreams, Hyenwu saw strange visions. He saw the planet as it had been thousands of years ago, green and beautiful. He saw the tall, graceful beings who had lived here working alongside the 6-legged creatures. He saw great machines that controlled the weather and the growth of plants. In the visions, he could understand the language of the original inhabitants. They spoke of their world as a living thing with its own thoughts and feelings. They had built their civilization to work with the planet, not against it. But something had gone wrong. The planet was dying, and they could not save it. When Hyenwu finally woke from his fever, he found Bugel sleeping beside him. The young creature had not left his side for the entire 3 days. When Bugel saw that he was awake, the creature made happy sounds and ran to get the others. Deho approached with something new. It was a small crystal, no bigger than Hyenwu's thumb, but it glowed with warm light. The pack leader carefully placed it in Hyenwu's hand. As soon as he touched it, the human felt better. His breathing became easier, and his strength began to return. "Where did you find this?" Hyenwu asked. Of course, Deho could not answer in words. But the pack leader gestured toward the deeper parts of the ruins as Hyenwu recovered. He began to understand that the creatures were trying to show him something important. They had been leading him to different parts of the ruins, showing him specific buildings and chambers. They were not just exploring. They had a purpose. One day, when Hyenwu was strong enough to walk again, Deho led him to a part of the ruins they had never visited before. It was deep underground, reached by a spiral ramp that seemed to go down forever. The walls were covered with the same symbols he had seen before, but these were different somehow. They seemed to glow with their own light. At the bottom of the ramp was a chamber unlike anything Hyenwu had seen. The walls were covered with crystals that pulsed with energy. In the center of the room stood a structure that looked like a tree, made of light. It was beautiful and frightening at the same time. The creatures gathered around the structure, making sounds that seemed almost like singing. Daeho approached the tree of light and placed his paw on its surface. The entire chamber filled with images and sounds. Hyanwu saw more visions, but these were different from his fever dreams. These were memories stored in the crystal tree. He saw the original inhabitants of the planet working desperately to save their dying world. He saw them creating the six-legged creatures as guardians, giving them intelligence and purpose. The final memory showed the original inhabitants placing their consciousness into the planet itself, becoming one with the world they had loved. They had not died. They had transformed into something else, something that could guide and protect the planet for all time. But the transformation was not complete. The planet was still dying, and the Guardians were not enough to save it. Something else was needed. Someone else. As the visions faded, Hyanwu understood what the creatures had been trying to tell him. The planet was alive, and it had been waiting for someone who could help complete what the original inhabitants had started. Someone with the knowledge and compassion to bridge the gap between what was and what could be. The creatures were not just helping him survive. They were preparing him for something much bigger. They were preparing him to help save their world. Hyanwu looked at Daeho and Bugel. At all the creatures who had risked their lives to keep him alive, he thought about his own world, so far away, and the people who would never know what had happened to him. He thought about the choice that was coming, the choice between his own life and the life of an entire planet. For the first time since crashing on this world, Yunhua was not thinking about rescue. He was thinking about responsibility. He was thinking about what it meant to be human in a universe full of other intelligent beings who needed help. The storm outside had passed, but a new storm was beginning inside his heart. Soon, he would have to make the most important decision of his life. The crystal tree had shown Hyanwu the truth, but understanding it was different from accepting it. For days after the vision, he sat in the underground chamber, trying to make sense of what he had learned. The creatures waited patiently, bringing him food and water, but never pressuring him to act. Daeho seemed to understand that the human needed time to process what he had seen. The pack leader would sit beside him for hours, a calm presence in the glowing chamber. Sometimes Bujal would join them, her young energy bringing moments of peace to the heavy atmosphere. Hyanwu began to study the symbols on the chamber walls. More carefully, the knowledge from the crystal tree, he could begin to understand their meaning. They told the story of the planet's original inhabitants, who called themselves the Cathari. The Cathari had been a peaceful people who lived in harmony with their world. They had built their cities to work with nature, not against it. Their technology was based on cooperation with the planet's living systems. For thousands of years, they had been happy and prosperous. But something had gone wrong deep inside the planet. The core systems that controlled weather, plant growth, and the flow of energy had begun to fail. The Cathari had tried everything they could think of to fix the problem, but nothing worked. Their world was dying and they could not save it. In desperation, the Cathari had made a terrible choice. They had given up their physical bodies to become part of the planet's consciousness. They hoped that by joining with the world itself, they could guide it back to health. But the transformation had been incomplete. They had become part of the planet, but they were not strong enough to heal it alone. The Cathari had created the six-legged creatures as guardians. These beings, which Hyanwu now knew were called Vorthok, were given intelligence and a deep connection to the planet. They were meant to help the Cathari consciousness guide the world back to life. But even with the Vorthok's help, the planet continued to die. The Cathari needed something more. They needed someone from outside, someone with knowledge and compassion. Who could bridge the gap between the planet's consciousness and the physical world? As Hyanwu studied the symbols, he began to understand the science behind the planet's systems. The Cathari had built machines that worked with biological processes. They had created a network of crystal formations that could control everything from rainfall to the growth of plants. It was technology far beyond anything humans had achieved. Problem was that the network was breaking down. Key connections had been severed, and important control centers had stopped working. The Cathari consciousness could see what needed to be fixed, but they could not interact with the physical world directly. They needed hands to work with, a mind that could understand both their advanced science and the practical problems of repair. Deho led Hu Yanwu to other parts of the ruins, showing him the locations of the broken systems. Some were small problems that could be fixed with basic engineering knowledge. Others were more complex, requiring an understanding of how biological and technological systems worked together. Working side by side with the Vorthok, Hyanwu began to repair some of the simpler systems. The creatures seemed to know instinctively which crystals needed to be connected and which ones needed to be removed. Their knowledge was not scientific in the way humans understood it, but it was deep and accurate. As they worked, Hyanwu began to feel a connection to the planet itself. Sometimes he would know exactly what needed to be done without understanding how he knew. Other times he would feel the planet's pain as if it were his own. The Cathari consciousness was trying to communicate with him, sharing their knowledge and their desperate hope. The work was exhausting, but also rewarding. Each system they repaired brought a small improvement to the planet's health. Streams that had been dry began to flow again. Plants that had been dying started to grow. The crystal formations began to glow more brightly. But as they worked, Hyanwu began to understand the true scope of the problem. The planet's core systems were failing in ways that could not be fixed from the outside. Someone would need to connect directly with the planet's consciousness, to become part of the network that controlled everything. The Cathari had tried to do this themselves, but their transformation had been incomplete. They had become part of the planet, but they were not strong enough to heal it. They needed someone else to join them, someone with the knowledge and strength to complete what they had started. Hyanwu realized that the Vorthok had been preparing him for this moment. From the beginning, every act of kindness, every moment of cooperation, had been building toward this choice. The creatures had been testing him, making sure he had the compassion and wisdom needed for such a terrible responsibility. One night, as he lay in his shelter surrounded by the sleeping pack, Hyanwu felt the planet's consciousness touch his mind directly. It was not words or images, but something deeper. He felt the desperation of billions of living things facing extinction. He felt the love of the Cathari for their world, and their willingness to sacrifice everything to save it. He also felt something else. Hope. The planet believed that he could succeed where the Cathari had failed. His human perspective, his different way of thinking, this might be exactly what was needed to complete the healing process, but the cost would be enormous. To join with the planet's consciousness, he would have to give up his physical form. Become part of the world itself, able to guide and protect it, but no longer truly human. He would save the planet, but he would die in the process. As dawn broke over the crystal ruins, Hyanwu made his decision. He looked at Deho and Buell, at all the creatures who had become his family. He thought about the billions of living things on this world who deserved a chance to live. He thought about what it meant to be human, to care for others, even when it cost everything. The choice was clear. He would do what needed to be done. He would save this world, even if it meant losing his own life in the process. It was what any human would do, what any decent person would do when faced with such a choice. The Vorthok seemed to sense his decision. They gathered around him, their fur glowing softly in the morning light. They knew what he was choosing, and they were grateful. Beyond words, they had found the help they needed, the bridge between worlds that would save everything they loved. Tomorrow, Hyanwu would begin the process that would transform him from a human into something else entirely. Tonight, he would spend his last hours as himself, surrounded by friends who had become family on a world that had become home. The morning of decision arrived with unusual silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Hyanwu prepared for what he had to do. He had spent the night talking to the Vorthok, sharing memories through touch and gesture. They could not speak his language, but they understood his heart. Deho had brought him to a high cliff overlooking the entire valley. From here, Hyanwu could see the progress they had made together. Streams flowed where there had been dust. Plants grew where there had been death. The crystal formations glowed with renewed energy, but it was not enough. The planet was still dying, just more slowly now. In the distance, Haiyan-Wu could see his crashed ship. The metal hull had rusted in the alien atmosphere, becoming part of the landscape. For a moment, he wondered if he could still repair the communication system. Maybe he could call for rescue. Maybe he could go home, but as he looked at the ship, he realized something important. That machine no longer felt like his path to freedom. It felt like a relic from his old life, a life that belonged to a different person. The man who had crashed on this planet weeks ago would have tried to repair that ship. The man he had become could not abandon the world that needed him. Buell appeared beside him, her young face full of concern. She had grown so much since he had first helped her, becoming strong and wise under the care of the pack. She nuzzled against his hand, her fur warm and comforting. "You understand, don't you?" Yan-Wu said softly. "You know what I have to do." Bajol made a sound that was almost like a sigh. Her large eyes looked up at him with something that might have been sadness, but also acceptance. She had learned about sacrifice from watching her pack care for each other. She knew that sometimes the hardest choices were the right ones. As the day passed, Haiyan-Wu found himself thinking about his old life. He thought about his sister Mi-young, who would never know what had happened to him. She would think he had died in some accident during his patrol. She would grieve for him, but she would never know that he had chosen to give his life to save an entire world. He thought about his commanding officer, Captain Nari, who had trusted him with important missions. She would wonder why his ship had never returned from its patrol. She would search for him, but she would never find him. The vast universe would have swallowed him up without a trace. He thought about his crew, his friends, all the people who had been part of his human life. They would remember him as a good soldier, a loyal friend, a man who did his duty. They would never know that his greatest duty had been to strangers on a world they had never heard of. As the sun began to set, Haiyan-Wu had visitors. Not physical visitors, but visions that felt as real as the ground beneath his feet. He saw Captain Neri standing before him, her uniform crisp and her expression stern but kind. "You always were too soft-hearted," she said with a smile. "But that's what made you a good officer. You cared about everyone, even people you had never met." "I'm sorry I can't come home," Haiyan-Wu replied. "I'm sorry I can't complete my mission." "Your mission was to explore and report on unknown worlds," Nari said. "You found something worth reporting. You found that there are good people everywhere in the universe, even if they don't look like us. You found that kindness can bridge any gap between species. That's the most important discovery any explorer can make." The vision faded, replaced by another. This time it was his sister Mi-young, looking exactly as she had when he had last seen her. She was crying, but she was also smiling. "I always knew you would do something important," she said. "Even when we were children, you were always helping others. You rescued that bird with the broken wing. You shared your food with the homeless man. You always put others first." "I wish I could see you again," Haiyan-Wu said, his voice breaking. "You will," Mi-young replied. "Maybe not in the way you expected, but love doesn't die just because bodies do. I'll feel you in every act of kindness, every moment of compassion. You'll be with me every time I help someone who needs it." As the visions faded, Haiyan-Wu felt a deep peace settle over him. He had made his choice, and it was the right choice. It was not dying. He was transforming into something that could protect and guide this world for generations to come. The Vorthok gathered around him as night fell. They formed a circle, their glowing fur creating a ring of light in the darkness. Daeho approached and placed his large paw on Haiyan-Wu's shoulder. The gesture was unmistakably one of respect and gratitude. "Thank you," Haiyan-Wu said to all of them. "Thank you for showing me what it means to be part of something bigger than myself." As he spoke, he felt the planet's consciousness reaching out to him. It was warm and welcoming, like coming home after a long journey. The Cathari were there, waiting to guide him through the transformation. They had been alone for so long, carrying the burden of their dying world. Now they would have help. Haiyan-Wu walked down from the cliff toward the crystal tree chamber. The Vorthok followed him, their presence a comfort in the darkness. Tomorrow he would begin the process that would merge his consciousness with the planet's systems. It would take time, and it would be painful, but it would save everything he had come to love about this world as he entered the chamber. Haiyan felt the crystal tree responding to his presence. The walls began to glow more brightly, and the air filled with a sound like distant music. The planet was singing, welcoming him home. He placed his hand on the crystal tree and immediately felt the connection form. Information flowed through him, knowledge of how to heal the world's systems. But more than that, he felt the love of the Kethari for their world, and their joy that someone had come to help them complete their great work. The transformation would begin at dawn. By sunset tomorrow, Haiyan the human would be gone, replaced by something new, something that was part human, part Kethari, part of the planet itself. Something that could bridge the gap between all living things and guide them toward a better future. But tonight, we still himself. Tonight, he could still touch Buell's fur and feel Daeho's strength beside him. Tonight, he could still remember what it felt like to be human, to care for others, to choose sacrifice over safety. As he lay down to sleep for the last time in his human form, Haiyan felt no fear. He felt only gratitude for the journey that had brought him here and excitement for the new existence that awaited him. He had found his purpose among the stars, and tomorrow he would fulfill it. The Vorthok settled around him, their breathing soft and steady in the glowing chamber. They would be with him through the transformation, helping him remember who he had been while he became who he needed to be. In the morning, everything would change, but the bonds of friendship and love they had built would remain forever. Haiyan closed his eyes and dreamed of a world made green again, of streams flowing clear and strong, of the Vorthok thriving under blue skies. In his dreams, he was both human and more than human, a bridge between worlds that would last for all time. The transformation began at sunrise. Haiyan stood in the center of the crystal chamber, surrounded by the Vorthok pack. Daeho and Buell were closest to him, their presence giving him strength for what was to come. As the first rays of sunlight touched the crystal tree, it began to pulse with incredible energy. The walls of the chamber filled with light. The air itself seemed to sing. Haiyan felt the planet's consciousness reaching out to him, welcoming him into something greater than he had ever imagined. The process was not painful, as he had expected. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey. His human body began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. But his mind, his memories, his love for the creatures who had become his family, all of these remained strong and clear. As his physical form dissolved, Haiyan felt himself expanding. He could sense every stream on the planet, every growing plant, every crystal formation. He could feel the deep networks that connected all living things. He was becoming part of the world itself, a guardian who could guide and protect everything he touched. The Kethari consciousness welcomed him with joy. They had been waiting so long for someone who could complete their great work. Together, they began the process of healing the planet's damaged systems. What had taken weeks for Haiyan to repair, as a human, now took only moments as part of the planetary network. Water began to flow in dry riverbeds. Dead trees sprouted new leaves. The crystal formations glowed with renewed power. Across the entire world, life began to return to places that had been barren for centuries. The Vorthok watched the transformation with wonder. They could feel the change in the planet's energy, the return of hope to their dying world. Buell's fur glowed brighter than ever before, and Daeho's wise eyes reflected the growing light around them as the process completed. Haiyan consciousness settled into its new form. He was no longer human, but he was not less than human either. He was something new, something that could bridge the gap between species and worlds. He could still think and feel and love, but now his love extended to every living thing on the planet. Years passed. The world that had once been dying became a paradise. Forests grew thick and green. Rivers ran clear and strong. The crystal formations created a network of light that could be seen from space. The Vorthok thrived, their packs growing large and healthy. Buell grew into a strong leader, becoming the mother of many young ones. She taught them the story of the human who had given his life to save their world. Daeho lived to be very old, his wisdom guiding the pack through many seasons. Finally passed away, his consciousness joined the planetary network, becoming part of the eternal guardian system. Other Vorthok joined them over the years, their life experiences adding to the collective wisdom that guided the world. They became a bridge between the physical and spiritual aspects of the planet, helping to maintain the balance that Haiyan had died to create. One day, decades after the transformation, ships appeared in the planet's sky. Human ships, searching for the lost reconnaissance vessel that had disappeared so many years ago. The explorers landed near the ruins of the ancient city, not knowing they were about to make the most important discovery in human history. The Vorthok, now numbering in the hundreds, greeted the humans with curiosity rather than fear. They had learned from Hohanwu's memories that not all humans were dangerous. These beings who looked like their beloved guardian might be friends as well. The human explorers were amazed by what they found. A world of incredible beauty, populated by intelligent creatures who seemed to welcome their presence.
Ow!
The Vorthok led them to a special place in the Crystal City, where a simple marker had been placed. The marker was made of the same crystal as the ancient buildings, but it bore symbols in both human and Vorthok languages. The human explorers read the inscription with growing wonder and sadness. Lieutenant Commander Haiyan, Human Space Force. He passed alone except for the alien wolves he once showed kindness to. He gave his life to save this world and all who dwell upon it. His spirit lives on in every stream, every tree, every act of love between different species. The explorers looked around at the thriving world, at the intelligent creatures who had guided them here, at the incredible beauty that surrounded them. They began to understand that they were not just visiting another planet. They were visiting a miracle. As they explored further, the humans discovered that the Vorthok had developed a complex society based on cooperation and mutual care. They had technology that worked in harmony with nature rather than against it. They had art and music and stories that celebrated the connection between all living things. But most importantly, they had a deep understanding of what it meant to care for others. They treated the human explorers with the same kindness that Haiyan had once shown to an injured young creature. They shared their food, their knowledge, their friendship. The human explorers stayed for months, learning from the Vorthok and teaching them in return. They discovered that the planet's consciousness, with Haiyan at its heart, was still actively protecting and guiding all life on the world. They could feel his presence in the wind, in the growth of plants, in the way the Vorthok cared for their young. When it came time to leave, the humans promised to return. They would bring others who could learn from this world, who could see what was possible when different species worked together. They would share the story of Haiyan and the Vorthok, showing the galaxy what true courage and compassion could accomplish. As the human ships departed, the Vorthok gathered at the memorial site. They sang their ancient songs, but now the songs had new words. They told of the human who had become part of their world, who had shown them that love could bridge any gap between species. Buell, now an elder with silver streaks in her glowing fur, led the ceremony. She had been there from the beginning, had watched the transformation that saved their world. She remembered the kindness of the human who had helped her when she was injured and afraid. As the sun set over the Crystal City, the Vorthok could feel their guardian's presence stronger than ever. Haiyan consciousness touched each of them. Sharing his love and pride in what they had accomplished together, they were no longer just the guardians of their world. They were teachers, showing the galaxy what was possible when beings chose cooperation over conflict. The planet pulsed with life and energy, a beacon of hope in a universe that often seemed dark and dangerous. It was a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of space, there were places where love and sacrifice had created something beautiful. And at the heart of it all was the spirit of a human who had chosen to give everything for beings he had barely known. His body was gone, but his courage lived on in every act of kindness between species. His memory was preserved in the songs of the Vorthok and the stories of the human explorers who had found his memorial. He had passed alone from his human life, but he had not died alone. He had died surrounded by friends who had become family, on a world that had become home. And in becoming part of that world, he had achieved a kind of immortality that no human had ever known before. The stars shone down on the thriving planet. And somewhere in their light, the spirit of Hyun-woo continued to watch over all the beings he had sworn to protect. His greatest mission had been completed, and the universe was a better place because of his sacrifice. The alien wolves sang their evening song, and in their voices, those who listened carefully could hear the echo of a human heart that had chosen love over fear, sacrifice over safety, and hope over despair. It was a song that would continue for as long as the stars themselves continued to shine.